Hamish Campbell, Vision on TV. So, can you introduce yourself first?
Yeah, my name's Tim Flitcroft, and I'm here because I brought a lot of leaflets and information about free trade agreements and their dangers. So
what's wrong with trade agreements? Surely they're good things.
Yeah, that's what people always say, and I think it's a good question, because free trade, who doesn't want free trade? And we think of sort of wars, trade wars in the 19th century, when, you know, people were restricted from trading, and that seems like a bad thing. So everyone's against that. And so normally you think of a free trade agreement as being about reducing the barriers, the tariff barriers they're called. So if you charge other countries more, so you protect your own industry, that's what it's about. So, for example, you might have a tariff on, say, meat, I don't know, or butter or something coming in from another country, so consumers have to pay more to get it from that country rather than from your own. So it's protecting basically your own production, which does actually, when you think about it, it's not completely unreasonable either, because you do want to protect your own, say, agriculture from other groups who might be, for example, America has huge resources in that respect, and so can swamp smaller things. So there's a sense to tariffs.
So that was the 20th century view of tariffs, wasn't it? Every country protected their own stuff. And
yeah, that was the kind of origin of tariffs. So that's why you have these trade barriers, and then you have attempts to kind of free it up when they get a little bit overly stuck. But actually the situation now is, this is an agreement called the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which for short is TTIP, which has now become like a word in its own right, TTIP. And this is an agreement between America and Europe. And but the point is that there are very, very low trade tariff barriers already. I mean, it's in the order of 5% or less. It's not like actually you have to pay a lot more to export your food or your cars or your technology or whatever to the other country. It's actually pretty free already. So what they're trying to do now is to reduce the non-tariff barriers. It all sounds a bit of a mouthful. So you're trying to reduce all those other barriers that impede trade. Now, the one example they always give is like, well, we have headlights in one way on our cars and you have headlights in another way. So if we could just agree on how the headlights were, they'd pass both sets of regulations concerning safety. So, you know, it would make trade easier. That's the argument that's always...
So this is in a modernised world.
Yeah, so that's the pro TTIP answer. But actually, that's always a reasonably sane argument. But what it means is that there is a lowering of standards. I mean, what is another point? Often regulations are regarded. Oh, who wants regulations? It sounds like a nasty word. Why do governments, you know, want to regulate? I don't. I want to be free, you know. But most regulations are here for to protect our environment, for example. To protect our food safety, to protect things like chemicals in makeup and lipstick, other things like that. So these are all actually protections. So actually, rather than use that word deregulate, you should think of it more like deprotect, because people have spent years putting all of these things in. I mean, I'm not going to defend every single protection scheme in advance. There might be some that might need looking at, but on the whole, they're there for us. And what this treaty is about, or this proposed treaty, it's not like millions of people throughout Europe said, hey, look, we really want to change things about our protection system. No. It originated with various chambers of commerce and business organizations. It's all being pushed by the big corporations. So if I was to say in 3 words what this is, it's an international power grab by the corporations.
So, but I'm just coming back to your original thing. So in the 19th century we had free trade and we had problems with flour was adulterated with chalk, and and people had lead in their makeup, and the world was a disaster in many ways. So these regulations was to mediate these.
Yeah, there's 2 different issues there. There were trade tariffs put in by countries to protect their own industries and things. And the other thing was there was very little protection in terms of how of elements in food or things in cosmetics or whatever. So these are 2 issues. So what's got conflated here is that this is called the Free Trade Agreement, when in fact it is about dismantling the protections that we have. And so that applies to all sorts of things. But the essential point to get here is that it's the corporations driving this, and they're trying to capture the kind of regulations that governments put in place. So there's something called the Investor-State Dispute Settlement, known for short as ISDS. And this allows a corporation, a foreign investor, to sue a government if they lose profits. And there are some famous examples of this. So perhaps the most well-known one is when Philip Morris sued the Australian government because they wanted to have plain cigarettes packaging, which incidentally was a World Health Organization guideline. And what's so particularly sinister about this is that they tried to go through the courts. It didn't work with Australia. Then they actually shifted there, because multinationals can do this. They shifted enough of their assets into Singapore, where there's a treaty between Malaysia and Australia, in order to then sue the Australian government under a free trade agreement, so-called free trade agreement. And actually, that particular one seems to have been lost. But I mean, it's put the countries under enormous pressure, and this country in the UK was going to have plain cigarette packaging. The coalition government was going to do it, but it seems to have got lost in the legislative thing. Something that would have been very helpful, I think, to slow down teenage smoking, but it got lost because the fear of being sued by these companies.
So these corporations want to remove all this stuff which was put there because we have had disastrous in many ways. It was put there to save us. Why are these corporations doing this? Surely it's going to end in tears. It's going to end in disaster again.
Why they're doing it is because they want to increase their profits. So they want to be able to not have any problems about exporting whatever they want. And there are huge differences between the US and the EU. So in the US, well, let's put it this way. In the EU, we have something called the Precautionary Principle. So something can't be legally produced until it's been tested. In the United States, it doesn't become illegal till it's been shown to be dangerous. So the United States system works to a great degree on a huge fear of being sued, and they've got these very, very powerful, and of course that suits the kind of capitalist approach, so everyone has to go through all these mountains of insurance and take all these risks, and that's how it gets sorted out, through companies being afraid of being sued. Whereas here what we do is we prove that it's safe first. Now I can't see how you can ever marry those two principles. And an example of this, I think, in cosmetics, there's I think it's like one element that's not allowed in the States in terms of lipstick. We've got about 31 elements that they allow in lipstick that we don't. So what you will get is American lipstick being exported to Europe. People not really realising it's probably stuck somewhere tinily on the label. This is sort of US standards, not EU. But it'll be allowed to be put in. So you get all the dangers of that kind of thing. Same with food. They're trying to really push having GM food into England. They're also trying to put their form of meat processing. In the United States, they have very lax forms of meat processing, so they tend to try and solve it all at the end of the process. In other words, when it's gone through all the rearing, transportation, slaughtering, further transportation, towards the end of the process, they put chlorine bleaches on it to kill any bacteria that's on the food. In Europe, we try and control the food production process at each stage, so you don't get outbreaks of things that can be dangerous to human health. They do it throughout the chain, throughout the food chain. So that's another example of the differences, and why we need to be incredibly scared of things. So the main thing is this threat to our ability to protect ourselves. And the other really scary thing about this agreement is that it's not just that we're signing up to a fixed series of agreements, which, by the way, are all conducted in secret. We do not know what's in TTIP. And that is a major abuse of democracy. Our representatives, only very few can see it, and when they go in there, they go in a room, they're not allowed to photograph it, take photocopies, they can't take an advice, they're supposed to just look at it. Really complicated, and I've looked at some, they are really complicated to look at, and that's all they can take out as a way of understanding what these negotiations are. So even supposing they could remember it, and we'd all know what it was, it's not a fixed agreement, it's what's called a living agreement. And what this means is that there's going to be a chapter in it called, again, this horrible word, regulatory cooperation, which again sounds, oh, that's nice, they're being really friendly with each other. But what it in effect allows is for corporations to make comments about legislation prior to it even getting into a chamber. So if there's some legislation which might affect us about environment, they can say, oh, well, that might affect our profits, we're not going to have that. So And also, it can be that if you want to do something that is, say, to protect health or environment, they can then use it to block it. And there's well-known instances in the States where these kind of similar structures evolve, where they've managed to stop legislation that would be protective of the public for about 10 or 11 years due to using these mechanisms. So it can work in a number of ways, which is very dangerous to democracy, really. And if you ask me, what can you do to help? Well, the thing is, the most important thing you can do is talk about it and spread the word and let people know, and not just couch it in terms of TTIP, but in terms of a general understanding that corporations are trying to get power disproportionately to what they should be doing in society. So to really have a larger story, that it's not just TTIP, but it's a generalized thing where corporations aren't paying tax, where corporations, position themselves wherever they want in the world in order to get the best possible deal from themselves. They blackmail governments in order to get themselves cited somewhere and not somewhere else. I mean, they cause mammoth environmental damage. They don't then clean up after themselves. They often so all of these kind of things, as you see it in this bigger story, that multinational corporations are too big. I mean, there are some the size of entire countries in terms of economics. So this is the bigger story of which these free trade agreements are a part. So I think we need to really protest against the way corporations are treated, the way they're. I mean, for example, I think they should be taxed on the basis of the business they conduct in a country. It's that kind of a thing. So the kind of things you can do is, the obvious ones are write to your MEP, and that's quite easy to find out, and to write to your MP, to join groups there are a number of groups that are fighting TTIP. So there's my group, which is called No TTIP. There's a group called Stop TTIP. Some of the NGOs, like Global Justice Now, are running big campaigns about it. So are War on Want, so are 38 Degrees, and so are Friends of the Earth. And in Europe, Greenpeace also do. So there's many ways you can join one of these organisations and start spreading information, get one of these lovely leaflets we've got downstairs, and you can hand them out and people can get to learn more about it.
Have you got a web address?
Yes, what is it? www.nottip.org, I think it is, but I'm not quite sure, to be honest. I don't.
Fantastic. Just one final question. How did you personally get involved in all this?
That's an interesting question. I came back from a holiday and I heard that CETA was about to be passed. CETA is the Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement. This is one between Europe and Canada and is lesser known, but it's just as dangerous because Americans can often make a subsidiary in Canada very easily, and so they can sue through that investor-state dispute settlement. So I heard it was being passed and not a word had been said about it in Parliament or anywhere. I just felt absolutely enraged that this was being signed off without any discussion whatsoever. So I organised a protest outside BIS and outside the European House. And actually Jeremy Corbyn came to that first one. Nick Dearden from Global Justice Now came from that. So Linda Korcher, who's been analysing these things for years. So we had a big demo, and we that's how I first got into it. Just sheer anger, really, that these issues just weren't being discussed.
Thank you very much.